comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, 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 money.
Dollar, dollar. Dollar, dollar. Ching, ching, bling, bling.
Woo! What it do? What it do? What it do? It's your boy Q. And there ain't nothing left to do but to go ahead and get down and do what it do. And can I just start off by saying that Zeke got paid? I told you so. If you haven't already hit that subscribe button down there, you should, because you're going to start noticing a trend. I tend to get a lot of these things here right. People were saying he wasn't going to get top dollar. He wasn't worth it. 6 years, $90 million. Remember that thing we talked about in the last episode? The most important part, $50 million guaranteed. And as the details come out on it, it's kind of heavy front-loaded, which is good as far as when it comes to signing some of those other pieces we talked about last episode, as far as Dak and Amari, and they're going to need to put some other pieces around them as well. But this does make Zeke the first $100 million Cowboy. Think about that. Jerry paid that man. But that wasn't the only news that we saw as far as heading into the first week of the season when it comes to big contract extensions. We also got to see out in LA Jared Goff. 4 years, $134 million. 110 of that being guaranteed. Yet another big contract from Stan Kroenke, which really has got me thinking about Major League. I know, but stick with me for a couple minutes here, because you remember the 1989 movie. Had a really interesting dynamic duo, a really young Charlie Sheen, a young Wesley Snipes, even a young Allstate guy. No, not that Allstate guy. That Allstate guy. Yeah, but you remember the story. New majority owner of the Cleveland Indian, Rachel Phelps, has a deal and an idea to try to move the team to a new city. But in order to do that, she needs to make the team bad enough for the attendance to drop low enough in order to get out of contract with the stadium. Now, the beginning of this movie kind of plays out with that same speculation we hear every year when it comes to teams tanking when it comes to like the NFL and the NBA draft. Because sure, the players, the coaches, they're going to try their hardest in order to become the stars that are out on top. But where it really starts is at the top of the organization. Because again, it starts with the top of the organization kind of meeting together, talking about the plan to make this team bad, and what pieces they're going to bring in as far as for trying out for the team in order to accomplish their goals. Now, even though their goal was to be a really terrible team, they did end up bringing some pretty cool characters and some people that were memorable that helped fuel that tanking. Now, they did bring in a catcher with some health problems, but he was a pretty good leader when it came to the locker room. They had a guy that hadn't proven himself at the pro level at all, but he could run like Hayes. But really the biggest star, looking back in it all, was their pitcher. Although he was really the only big contributor when it came to that portion of the team. The biggest problem, though, when it came to Major League, was they hired a coach that actually started winning some games. Okay, maybe that one's a bit of a stretch over there. But look, this is one of those movies, if you guys watched it, we all know about it, right? This is one of those stories where the sequel might actually rival the original, if it's better. But we do like to forget that they made a third, right? But this ain't it, Chief. We're talking about Major League. The Stan Kroenke story. Look, let's make one thing clear here before we get started. Stan Kroenke is a very successful businessman and sports owner. There's a reason that he's owned quite a few teams that have gone on to win championships. And the Denver Nuggets, by the way, just might be the next one. Sooner than you think, by the way. It really all started in 1995 for Stan Kroenke when he helped move the then LA Rams from Anaheim out to St. Louis when he bought 30% of the team. So, shortly after coming to St. Louis, the Rams saw some success in the draft, landing 3 stud first round draft picks in Orlando Pace, Grant Windstrom, and Torrey Holt, all of whom really helped contribute to bringing the Lombardi Trophy to St. Louis, and really ended up being integral parts of that team that everyone knows, which is the greatest show on turf. Now, during that Super Bowl season, the Rams won 10 games, the same amount of games, coincidentally enough, that they would go on to win from 2008 to 2010, which also lined up with the 3 years after the passing of then majority owner Georgia Frontiere. Now, as Stan Kroenke became the majority owner, we saw him not really make any moves to make the team better, watching the attendance slip while failing to work with the city of St. Louis on improvements to the stadium and even on working towards an actual stadium in that city itself later on. Starting to sound familiar? And hey, can we really blame him for wanting to move the team out west? I mean, let's look at it. In 1999, he founded Kroenke and Sports Entertainment. In 2000, he became the full owner of both the Denver Nuggets and the Colorado Avalanche. Just 2 years later, he became a part owner of the Colorado Crush, an arena football team. Even in 2004, he purchased both a team in the National Lacrosse League and a Major League Soccer team, both based in Colorado as well. So again, can we really blame him for wanting to take his team that's farthest out east and move him back out west? I mean, I'm pretty sure if the Denver area or even just Colorado itself was a big enough market to sustain 2 professional football teams, he probably would have tried to move them there. And yeah, sure, teams have their ups and downs in all major sports. Some highs are longer than others, some lows are longer than others. Sometimes you even have dynasties that seem to really control the market for a couple years. But there is one thing that always seems to be in common when it comes to the laughingstock organization in sports. You know the ones: the Lions, the Browns, the Bills, the Jets, at least just to name a few when it comes to the NFL. But that one thing that they have in common is god-awful ownership. Sure, you'll have some teams that strike oil for a couple years, maybe even win a couple rings over a course of a couple. But that just helps them overlook the terrible leadership. Sometimes those organizations even end up becoming one of the most popular ones in the sport, have an annoyingly awful fan base that constantly and just annoyingly screams every single damn year's "We them!" Wait, what was I talking about? Oh, right, but those aren't Stan Kroenke teams. I mean, let's look at it. The Rams not only went to 2 Super Bowls in 3 years, they won one of them within the first couple years of Kroenke being at the helm of any professional sports organization. But again, let's not just look at that. The Denver Nuggets went to 10 straight playoffs under Kroenke, including a trip to the Western Conference Final where they did unfortunately fall short to Kobe Bryant and the Lakers on his trip to his 4th ring. If we're being real, the best season in Colorado Avalanche history is under Stan Kroenke. Although, to be fair, that probably had more in part to do with the phenomenal play of Joe Sakic and Patrick Waugh, but you can still see a little bit of a trend, right? This isn't a guy who goes out and wastes generational talent like we've seen the Fords do up in Detroit. Twice. Which is why, really, if you think about it, it never made sense, at least to me, why when you have a talent like Steven Jackson in your backfield, one of 6 guys in NFL history to record 8 straight 1,000-yard rushing years, that during that time, a guy like Stan Kroenke overspends for Mark Bulger. It makes him a top-paid quarterback in the NFL. I mean, at the time, Bulger was Mr. 36 and 24, throwing 1 pick for every pair of touchdowns. And I'm not even a Jay Cutler fan. But what I am saying is, you probably should have at least taken a gamble on him in 2006 instead of swapping picks with Chicago, since you really didn't get anything out of it. I mean, in 2008, just a year after Mark Bulger only won you 2 games, you pass up on guys like Matt Ryan and Joe Flacco. Now, granted, Chris Long was a pretty solid pickup on the defensive side of the ball, The only problem, they never put the pieces around him for them to really be successful. The way that he was able to be successful in the next two teams he played for, winning 2 different rings. In 2009, after another 2-win season, you could have taken a risk on Mr. Butt Fumble himself instead of Jason Smith. And don't worry, even some of those Rams fans sitting there wondering, who in the world is Jason Smith? I did the same thing, and I considered myself a Rams fan at the time. And I'm not saying that teams, even good teams, don't have big misses from time to time in the draft. But what I am saying is the St. Louis Rams are the only major sports team owned by Stan Kroenke that has made the playoffs less times than they have made it under his reign. Let's face the facts. They scored great picks in the first round, back to back to back, in the years both coming to St. Louis and when the departure of the Rams was essentially written on the walls there within the halls of the Edward Jones Dome. And admittedly, maybe there is just a smidgen of bitterness from sitting down at the beginning of each NFL season as an STL resident and someone who had became, I would call, a fan of the team, hoping that at least this year we would see some quality football. But if I could sit back and feel that the Rams' departure was kind of like the Chargers in San Diego, a failure to cooperate with the team to have a great facility for the organization, I may actually understand. But we've now seen the Rams go from the bottom third of the league in offense for over a decade to being the top 2 in its first 3 years in LA. Look, throughout any team under the Kroenke Sports and Entertainment umbrella, there is pretty well the culture of consistency, which is pretty evident everywhere except the time leading up to the departure of St. Louis. And sure, when the Rams got back to LA, they initially saw a spike in attendance. But once they kind of got over that homecoming feeling, they started to see similar attendance numbers that warranted Kroenke to take the team and leave from the Midwest. At least up until a time where they had a Super Bowl contender. At the end of the day, one of the best portions of the Rams franchise will forever live in St. Louis. And Stan Kroenke major leaguing the city of St. Louis, it's no longer a conspiracy. It's just a piece of history. But guys, thanks so much for checking out this episode of On Cue Sport. If you haven't already, again, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Do me a favor and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think as far as the Stan Kroenke story of St. Louis when it comes to major leaguing the city. Let me know of maybe some stories you want me to cover up in the upcoming days. As always, guys, this is your boy Q, signing out.